All right, we're going to kick things off. Like I said, we're recording this so that we can post it for others who may be missing it. Let's start, and we will go alphabetically because that's fun. Why don't you introduce yourself and tell us about your work history? So, Christina, can you kick us off?
Yes. Yes, hi guys. I'm Chris. I have been with Le Chateau for it'll be 10 years in November. And before that, I did a lot of service industry jobs, bartending. I hosted karaoke for 5 years. Pretty much always working with people because that's my jam. Yes.
So, thank you. And so Chris and I actually know each other from working at Le Chateau back in the day. So that's how we are one and the same. Emma, can you let us know your history?
Yeah, so my name's Emma, obviously, and I currently am working for Best Buy. I'm an assistant manager there for operations. I also have been on the sales side as well as an assistant manager that way. I started out seasonally, much like Chris, actually, which is very interesting. And I also used to work with Daniel too. I've worked in the bar industry, actually still currently do, and hopefully after COVID as well, we'll start up again in that. And again, I work with people just like Chris, and yeah, I love it.
Excellent. Thank you, Emma. And Phil.
There we go. Hi, guys. My name's Phil. I started my career in retail as well, working for Shoppers Drug Mart. So I was doing that for 7 years. And then after that, I moved on to a private clinic. So I was in the medical field for a little bit. And then I moved back to retail because I missed just the movement and interacting with people all the time. So that's where I was working with Emma for about 5 years at Best Buy. And then now I work at the Ottawa airport. I work for a company called Reef Technology, and we manage ground transportation for the Ottawa airport on their behalf. So that's what I do right now.
Excellent. Thank you, Phil. For full disclosure, Phil and I don't just happen to have the same last name. We are married. So he is the original Fernandez, and I am the clone or the fake one. And last but certainly not least, Shannon. Who are you and what's your work history?
Oh, hi. So I'm Shannon. I have been working in retail for what feels like forever now. I've worked everywhere from Le Chateau to Zara to Victoria's Secret, H&M, every single position possible. And I am currently the manager of a retail cannabis store called Tokyo Smoke that opened in February.
Awesome. Thank you. And so I started working when I was 15 years old. For the four of you, is that an abnormal age for someone to start working? Like, when did you start working, and what's the age that you often hire?
I'll start. I started working when I was 15. Before that, I worked under the table, like babysitting, dog walking, that sort of thing. I've always worked because if I wanted to have money, I had to work for it. And I did start off with retail as well. With Le Chateau now, you have to be at least 18. So we do look for a more mature staff member. However, we have made exceptions. If someone comes in who seems very responsible and with a strong work ethic and with some experience, then yes, we will hire younger for sure.
I started when I was 16. I started at a privately owned bakery, actually. Then I moved over to Shoppers. But generally at Best Buy, we won't hire unless you are 16 or older.
I started working, I think, when I was 17, and I started working for a private little perfume boutique. So somebody took a chance on me, which was great. Currently in the industry I'm in now, I can't hire anybody that is under 19 because you have to be of legal age and have a couple other qualifications. But I do know at other previous places, we would hire people that were like 17 years old.
For me, I also started working when I was about 17. I know most retail employers will start hiring around 16, 17, that age. In my current field, in my current company, we don't hire unless you're of age 18, depending on what part of the country you're in, just because, for instance, in my case, you need to have access to a vehicle, a company vehicle, and you need to be able to pass a security check for the airport. So you need to be a certain age for that.
Awesome. So the great thing is that you're all coming from the same kind of age experience, which is around the grade 10, grade 11 age group. So after the careers course, for anybody here and those of you who have already done your careers course and just are listening to get more information, this is the age where you can and should start working. So on that note, let's go reverse order and let's start with Shannon. What are some tips for applying for part-time jobs? Because we all want that job. We want that first one so we can get the paychecks rolling in and buy all our things with the coin. What are some tips that you have? Maybe your top 2 tips of what you should do to apply for a job.
When applying for a job online, because I know a lot of stuff is done online at this point, I think it's really important to have a pretty stellar kind of cover letter right now. And that's where you can kind of showcase, like, you may have a lack of experience, but that's where you can showcase your like passion for where you want to go or for that particular store or whatever place of employment. Something like that would make you stand out above the rest because people want to hire employees who want to work there, you know? And other than that, if you are applying in person, I would suggest really going in looking professional and asking to speak to the manager. You know, it's something that's kind of scary to do when it's your first time, but it's definitely something like brave. And we know that it takes a little bit of guts to go and ask to speak to the manager and introduce yourself and hand off your resume.
Awesome. Phil, what are your tips for applying for a part-time job?
Definitely do some sort of preparation beforehand. Know a little bit about the company that you're hiring or that you're applying for. Because that's usually a question that will come up. They'll ask you why you're applying there, and if you don't have an answer that really makes sense, then it's quick no. So that's what I would say.
That is good advice. Emma, how about you? What are your tips? And I've muted your mic, so you have to unmute yourself.
Okay, perfect. I can do the mute and unmute. I usually do it at work with conference calls, but thank you. So one of the things is, we already kind of mentioned this, but tailor your resume. So like Phil had mentioned, know who you're applying for. And if it is going to be in person when you're bringing it in and you're going to apply, we already mentioned talking to a manager, but confidence is number 1. So always be confident about what you have to bring to the table. The other thing is also to follow up on your application too. So if you haven't heard anything, there's no harm in popping by just to see how it was going, how's your application doing. And then the other thing is if you are applying online, there's a lot of quizzes, I suppose you have to do, like a kind of quiz that you have to do that would pass through some flags. So for example, are you eligible to work in Canada? Things like that. One of the biggest things is availability as well. So just make sure that you do give your proper availability. I find that a lot of people applying for jobs will kind of tailor that, and that's okay. You want your true availability as well, but just make sure that you can pass those flags as well if you're applying online.
Awesome. Thank you, Emma. And Chris, what are your tips for part-time jobs? Oh, you are also muted, so you'll have to unmute yourself. Sorry.
Yeah, so most of my applications are people who actually walk into the store. We do get some online, but I like to get a first impression of you when you walk in. But my number 1 red flag, which is an instant no for me, is when people come in groups. I don't hire groups. I don't hire you and your friends. But I understand how it's scary to go. And it's fun to have a buddy when you are applying resumes, like dropping off resumes, like say you're in a mall or something like that. I used to do that too. Make sure you don't go in with your friends. You want to go by yourself, speak to the manager, and really show that you're going to be professional and a bit more independent too.
That's awesome. And on that note with red flags, how would you suggest somebody overcome that fear of applying in person by themselves?
It really just gets easier with time. I mean, I remember being scared and really nervous my first time, but honestly, the more you do it, the more you reach out, the easier it gets. It only hurts the first time, really. That's it. And then once you're past that, you'll be good to go. And don't look down on yourself if you don't have another job or any job experience. Maybe look if you have any volunteer experience or any other extracurriculars. Say if you have something like, say you coach a little league team or something like that. These are also skills that can be applied and to kind of show that you can take responsibility as well. So there's always a way to kind of highlight your attributes.
Awesome. And let's go to Emma, because having worked at Best Buy for a long time and across a bunch of different stores, what are some red flags for you where you're like, ooh, don't think I want to hire this person or even give them an interview? Also, Emma, you're still muted.
Yeah, I forgot about that. So we already mentioned coming in groups. So friends and your mom or your dad coming in as well. That's one of the things, because we want to see that you're able to work independently. It's great that you can work in a team if you come in with your friends, but you also need to be able to work independently too. The other thing that's a red flag for me would be kind of your appearance as well. You don't want to be coming in like sweatpants and like kind of grungy clothing. You don't need to by any means come into Best Buy in a full suit or like a tux. Don't worry, or dress and heels, but just make yourself look presentable as well, because we also want to make sure that you can follow practice. You can follow proper hygiene and things like that as well. Another red flag would be the question we already talked about. Why do you want to work here? The amount of times that I get because I like electronics is amazing, but we need to go a little bit more in depth in that. We have a lot of electronics at our store. We also have non-electronics too. And everyone likes electronics, guys. We're 2020. So just be a little bit more in depth and be a bit more prepared for when you come in.
Awesome. On that note of dressing professionally and whatnot, let's turn to Shannon. And what would you say to somebody who is applying or wants to apply at a store or company that has a very niche look? So think of companies like Hot Topic, or even stores that are like for fishing gear or whatnot. What should you wear when you're applying to those places that have that very specific clientele? Even like Lululemon, where they only really sell athletic gear. What should you wear when you're dropping off your resume?
Well, I think it's really important to take into consideration, like none of those places that you've mentioned are particularly fancy. So if you come in like a suit, it's going to stand out and it's not necessarily going to seem like a right fit. But you also can't come in full fishing gear, if you're going to apply for a place that, sells that kind of stuff. So I think it's important to kind of tailor your appearance a little bit. So for instance, even just wearing dress pants, they don't have to be black dress pants or whatever, but it's like a step above denim is always pretty great, even if it is a place like Hot Topic. Just, cute little plaid pants or something like that, and like a clean button-up shirt, something just plain black. You're still going to get your foot in the door that way. It's pretty inconspicuous, but you still look put together, and you would be able to look like you could sell that casual stuff as well.
Awesome. So we drop off the resume, and we get that magic phone call that you get an interview. And let's turn to Phil to start off this one. What is something that someone should know when they're going in for an interview? Like, what is the one key piece of information that you would want them to know when they're coming in for an interview?
So for me, definitely show up on time. We have taken the time out of our day to set up the interview with you, and it's certainly respectful if you have the ability to show up on time. If you can't, let's say life got in the way, things that are out of your control, certainly make an attempt to contact us and let us know that you'd be late for whatever the reason is. That's probably my number one thing. For me, I hold my interviews off-site from the airport, so I'm physically making an attempt to come meet you, and if you can't show up on time, it's super disrespectful for me, and it will probably lead to me already being in a negative, or seeing you in a negative light, right?
Awesome. And Chris, what about for you? What is the one thing or the two things that you feel somebody should know about interviews if they're coming in for one? And remember, you're still muted.
Yes. So like Phil said as well, being on time or even a few minutes early makes a huge difference. And I've had some interviews in the past where the people, like the interviewee, is waiting outside my store I guess, for me to magically know who they are and to come and get them. So you really have to come in and just don't be shy and be like, hey, no name of who you're interviewing with. And one thing, it's a big red flag for me if there's no direct eye contact. So we really want to see your best self. So come in, shake someone's hand or shake my hand, and then we can get started.
Yeah, don't just find a random customer in the store and shake their hand, hoping that will help you in your interview. Shake the hand of the person who's going to actually interview you. Mm-hmm. And Emma, what are your suggestions for what people should know about interviews?
Well, other than what we have already said, Phil mentioned on timing. I also want to make sure you know the location as well. We have multiple Best Buys around the city, and you don't know how many times I get someone, hey, I'm here for an interview with Sean. We don't have anyone named Sean, but I know that Maryville location has someone named Sean. I think you're at the wrong place, so I have to call now the Maryville location, let them know. So just make sure you guys know the location if there's multiple box stores or it's a chain. The other thing is I already mentioned this, is be confident and be yourself. And then the other thing is if you mess up or you do something wrong or say something wrong, keep pushing and bounce back from that, because that perseverance is huge for someone as an employer. So yeah.
Awesome. And on that note too, don't forget that there's nothing wrong with taking a breath or a pause. And you can see this with our 4 experts that are on the panel today. When I'm asking a question, they're not just responding right away. They are taking that moment to think about the question. Even though they have the questions and they're able to prepare themselves, there's still that pause. The questions might be rephrased differently. It also shows that you're willing to think about what is being asked and articulate yourselves. So especially for those of you who are English second language, where not only do you need to think about the question, but you also need to think about how is it being asked and what are you going to say so you can put it into sentences. Take those 10 seconds. That's perfectly fine. And if you need that clarification, ask for that clarification. Because a lot of employers, and I'm sure our 4 panelists can attest to it, you would prefer an employee who will ask to make sure they're going to do the job right the first time, rather than them go do the job, make mistakes, and then have to go back and redo it. But on that note, I love horror stories. I think they're hysterical and they really highlight what shouldn't happen. And Emma's shaking her head. No, we don't like being in the horror story. We like hearing about the horror story. So let's turn to ever faithful Shannon for an interview horror story. Shannon has interviewed hundreds, if not thousands of people, and has many, many stories from which to pull. So let's hear one of those ones.
Sorry, I have my phone propped up and it's not going very well right now. One of my horror stories, I'm actually going to tell a horror story about somebody who came in. I'm not going to give a personal one today because I'm not in super storytelling mode. But I once had an interview with somebody who did not want to be there. It was actually for when I also worked at Le Chateau, which is a little bit of a fashion forward place. This person came in sweatpants and like a t-shirt that was dirty. I was still polite and gave them the time of day. But when I sat down, they did not want to be there. It was painful, but at the same time, I was kind of intrigued by their answers because they had, the confidence to even show up like that. So I wanted to go along with it a little bit. They didn't know anything about the store. I asked them how they even got the interview, and they were like, I don't know. Somebody just called me they saw my resume online. So they didn't even know what they were heading into. And I asked them, I remember this one, I asked them what their greatest accomplishment in life was. And they were like, well, being alive this far. So honestly, it was pretty funny, to be honest, but it was also just like a complete waste of my time. So if you really don't want to work at a place or don't know what it's about, it's like Phil said before, do your research if you don't know what it's about, find out something. And like I said, if you don't want to be there, then don't be there because you're just literally wasting everybody's time. That's it.
Thank you for that. Yep, I do love the horror stories. And when I used to work at Le Chateau, it was great because there was Chris, there was myself, and there was Shannon, and we could call each other and just share whatever horror stories there were, which as a manager, is great to joke about afterwards, but during the actual moment, it's not a fun experience. It's not a good experience, and you never want to be that horror story. While Shannon is collecting herself, because, you know, phones fall over and such, Chris, what are your tips for a successful interview? So we heard a horror story where somebody came in, sweatpants, dirty t-shirt, didn't want to be there, didn't know how they got there, and were proud of the fact that they were just alive up until that moment. Let's go to the complete opposite. And what are the things you should do to be successful in your interview?
So as mentioned before, direct eye contact, and also to being honest. I mean, especially when you're starting out, you don't have this huge resume of all these positions. But one of my best interviews was this young girl I ended up hiring. She'd had one job previously in like a pizza shop, taking like delivery orders. But I really liked her energy. I asked her questions on how she might handle this situation. But what she really showed me was a willingness to learn, where she was saying, you know what, I don't have a lot of experience in this, but I can do this, and I've done this, and I just really want to work here and learn. And because she had noticed, she heard from some other friends who had worked for the company before that they really like the work environment. So it's okay if you're not fully experienced. You're not going to be experienced when you're starting out, but really showing a willingness to learn and having that energy, I find makes a huge difference as well.
That's awesome. And that really highlights some of the key things to remember. Not everybody is going to have a perfect resume for wherever they're applying, but everybody has skills. Everybody has great qualities that could make them applicable to the different work settings. And so, again, Chris is a great example. She used to work in the bar scene, hosting karaoke, and then she moved to Le Chateau. Both those jobs center around customer service. Did Chris know all the fashion trends and everything that Le Chateau was doing at that time? No. Also because Le Chateau is doing like 101 things at one time. Like,
you learn it though.
That she had. We have a question from Fatma. So a question: I'm here in Canada from 6 months ago, and I didn't work anywhere before, and I don't have any experience at any job. How can I find a job, and how can I know that I can work at this job? Like, how could she choose a job? So let's start with the first part of that question. And let's throw this to Emma, because Best Buy hires a lot of young people. You get somebody who comes in and they have zero experience, like no work experience. Their volunteer experience is really, really minimal. And they haven't been able to do extracurriculars at school for whatever reason. So basically, their resume would be a piece of paper with their name and phone number on it. What should they do?
Sorry, I was just unmuting there. But just like Chris had mentioned, is to be honest and to just be yourself. When I do an interview, and I'm sure the rest of the panel can agree, you get a lot of people who give the answers that they think that you want to hear, such as, what's your greatest weakness? Well, I take on too much. Things like that. And honestly, I like to have fun in my interview and get to know you, because that means that's the person that's going to be working for me or working alongside other people as well. And as much as you might not have any experience, that's okay. That's not a problem. You can still come in. We already talked about being confident. We already talked about how you should be dressing, and making eye contact, and then being yourself. And honesty is the best policy anyway. So.
Awesome. And what about for you, Shannon? If somebody comes in, because when I said like blank piece of paper with your name and phone number, you nodded along to that. What should somebody do in that situation?
Honestly, I would really I'd love to hear people's like willingness to work. Like, not everything you're going to do is going to be super glamorous. Like, there's going to be floors to be mopped. There's going to be customers to be like angry customers to be dealt with. There's going to be shelves to fill, that kind of thing. So it's not, it's great if you're fantastic with customers, obviously you need to be, but the willingness to learn and do all of the other things as well, like details to like the nitty gritty, those need to be done. And that's what we're hiring you for. So just really knowing what those kind of look like and being upfront with like, yes, I'm super excited to do this. Like, I'll do whatever. That's really cool. That's something that I greatly appreciate. My employees who step up and just mop the floor, that is huge to me. The ones that like don't like fight with me when I ask them to do it, that's like the biggest thing. I'm not even kidding.
And how would you react if somebody came in with a resume that really just talked about their schoolwork because that's all the experience that they have? So they come in and they say that they've worked on large projects and they've worked in groups and they've ensured that as much of their homework and stuff is handed in on time as possible.
For something like that, you know, I'd love to hear that level of responsibility. Giving other examples as well is pretty key. So, you know, you love working in groups. That's amazing. Can you give me an example of like how you can apply that group work to actually working here? How you feel how that would be relevant? Stuff like that. Dig really deep. Find some examples that you think can apply with this. So even stuff of just like being on time, knowing the importance of that, you know, that kind of stuff, that's really key.
Awesome. And let's go to the second part of that question, which is how can I find a job? So how can you choose a job? Phil, let's turn to you. What are some ways that you suggest people could try and find a part-time job?
In today's day, there's a lot of technology-based ways to find jobs. So a lot of job search websites that will help allow you to filter your results based on what you like. There's also several agencies that you can go to where basically they'll help you create a profile and then they'll go look for a job for you based on what you've kind of given them as answers. I've never done one of those personally, so I don't have much experience, but otherwise there's a couple sites like LinkedIn is a really good platform that's for a lot of people looking for professional careers, where that's how I ended up in my current position. Is you create your LinkedIn profile and you fill it in with whatever questions it asks you, and then it just basically puts you out there, and someone reached out to me and that's how I got my job.
And what about for you, Chris? What suggestions do you have on how to find a job?
Well, what I want to make a note of too is because I've had a lot of people who've applied who are either international students or are new to the country, is that's important to be prepared to apply for a job, which means getting your paperwork in order. If you do need like your SIN number, I've had people apply for jobs who've gone through the interview process and I hired them, but they didn't have any of that documentation, which I need. I physically cannot hire you until that's done. So do take a little bit of time to research and make sure you have your SIN number and all that stuff as well too, which is important.
That's awesome. And that is super important. The worst thing is to be offered a job and then say, I actually can't take it because I don't have the proper documentation to allow me to work. The other thing too is just go into the store. Phil was talking about a lot of tech, and that's great. You know, a lot of companies have the online positions or the positions online, but there's nothing wrong with going into a store and saying, I'm wondering, are you currently hiring? And if you are, how do I go about applying? Because I would like to work here. And a lot of companies, especially smaller stores, they still do really rely on that in-person interaction and that one-on-one approach. So great questions, Fatima. If any of you have any questions, definitely use the chat feed there, and we'll get to them as they come up. Let's move back to the interviews. So Chris was saying before how to be successful in an interview, eye contact, confidence, using what you know. Phil, what are other things that people need to do in order to be successful in an interview?
I would say one of the things that you can do is, I know you said not technology, but if you go online, a lot of companies, you can find their interview questions online and you can kind of practice what to expect ahead of time. That's always one good thing. And then, I don't know, just be yourself, really. Depends on the situation and the questions that come up.
That's good. And that's a really good point about being yourself. If you are fake in your interview, and you get hired, that means you then need to stay that fake person. Whereas if you are yourself in the interview, that means you can be yourself while you remain employed. So don't give the person that you think the company wants, give the person that you are and how that can make the company an even better place to work. Shannon, Chris, and I are three very distinct people, but we all have worked for the same company and we all worked at the same time. And we all had different strengths that we brought to the table. Emma, Phil, and I are very distinct people, but the three of us have worked for the same company at the same time. And so companies want a diverse range of individuals. They want those different personalities so that they can market to the most amount of people. And at the end of the day, sell the most of their product to the most amount of people, because that's what they're about. They're about making that money. Emma, let's turn to you for not a horror story, but let's call it a golden story. Can you tell us maybe about like the best interview that you've either had or that you've given?
Yeah, I actually just recently had an interview this past July, and it was for a supervisor position. So it wasn't for a new position, like part-time, like some of you guys might be applying for. But I literally ended up calling him while he was driving home from the interview to offer him the job because that's how good he was. And everything we had spoken about was wholeheartedly what he brought to the table, and the connection of just how honest he was and how real he was, his work ethic, really, really came out in that interview. Now, the differences obviously here are going to be that he had multiple different opportunities and has interviewed before with other companies. So that being said, it's something that you guys can work up to, but we already talked about the fact that practice makes perfect. He was, I don't know, a very, 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 very good person, and his work ethic has not let me down. So that interview went really well, and exactly what he said in that interview is how he's applied himself in the workplace, which is amazing.
Now, would your expectations of him coming into the interview be the same as somebody like Fatma, who this would be possibly her very first interview, and she hasn't had previous work experience?
If we already spoke about the honesty piece, if you're honest about that, I don't expect her to be managing the money and doing supervisor work and all that. But just be honest about the experience you bring to the table. We actually have a value at Best Buy, and one of them, we have 4, but one of them is unleash the power of your people, which means we like to give our associates the power to make some decisions. Obviously, you can't make all of them, like giving away a TV for free to your friend, for example. But we want you guys to bring your skills to the table and utilize those skills and bring that to your workplace and to what you can do. So I do expect the same level of work ethic, yes, out of both of them. I don't expect the same level of work based off of experience. And I understand that concept as well. But just being there, and if someone asks you to do something, getting that task done is a major accomplishment. Like Shannon had mentioned, it's like one of the biggest things, especially in a retail location, where a lot of people, it might not be busy. And so they might just be relaxing and hanging out, but there's tons of stuff to be doing. So especially if you can show that you can work independently and as a team. So if it's dead on the floor, go see your manager and see what there is to do. But I still expect the same work ethic, absolutely.
And that actually segues really well into the next question that I want to ask. And we'll start with Shannon on this one, and we'll talk to each of our panelists on this, and we'll go in reverse alphabetical order. So we'll do Shannon, Phil, Emma, and Chris. And so I want your 3 non-negotiable expectations for your employees. Now, for those of you who are in my class or who are joining otherwise, a non-negotiable expectation is an expectation that somebody has of you that you cannot get rid of. You have to meet this expectation in order to get the job and keep the job and succeed in the job. And so I want to turn to now, Shannon, what are the 3 that you think would be the most important that people absolutely must know in order to get, keep, and succeed in a part-time job?
I really think like attendance is important to me. That's like number 1. I understand that people are late sometimes or get sick, that totally happens. I get it. But one, if you're ever late, you need to let your employer know that you're about to be late before your shift actually starts. And if you're sick, you actually have to call in sick the minimum of like 3 hours before your shift. So that kind of thing. It's really important to be that reliable for your job. Two, a really positive attitude. I don't expect people to be cheerleaders every day. I am by no means like a peppy cheerleader, but if somebody asks you to do something, you can't just have a negative attitude or be like every single time. You're not going to like everything that you're going to be asked to do, but it's all stuff that needs to be done. And three, I do expect that you have a little bit, this is maybe a little bit weird, but a little bit of like pride in where you're working. So it kind of goes to, you kind of have to like or find something that you like about where you're working to make, honestly, your day go by better. If you really hate where you work, it's going to show, and it's going to create a whole negative atmosphere around you. So, finding something that you like about where you are, that to me is really important as well.
Awesome. And let's turn to Phil. What are the 3 non-negotiable expectations for you?
For me, so my first one is respect. It doesn't take much to have respect for the people that you work with. I certainly will respect you if you're coming into work on time and you're putting in the effort and the energy into completing whatever the task is. And then respect does go both ways. So I respect you, I expect that you respect me, and things will go great. It also makes your day at work a lot faster and easier and more enjoyable. The second thing is honesty. For me, that's a really big thing. So again, like Shannon said, if you're going to be late, please just be honest and tell me. Don't make up some long contrived excuse as to like why you couldn't make it into work, because most of the time I'll find out anyways. So just be honest with me. I will be honest with you. And the last thing is communication. So all 3 kind of work together, but communication, I'm not a mind reader, and I don't expect you to be a mind reader either. I will tell you what I need from you, and I expect that you communicate back to me if you need time off, or if you, again, are going to be late or going to be sick, something's happened, you just need some time to not be at work, maybe you're being overworked, just communicate with me, because chances are your manager in wherever you find a job will not be able to read your mind either. So those are my 3 things.
Awesome. Thank you, Phil. And Emma, what are yours?
Everything that everyone has mentioned already is amazing. I also just want to work a little bit off of that. So one of them is work habits. So that includes your attitude, showing up on time, and communication. The other thing would probably be productivity. And when I mean productivity, I don't mean work. I just mean you have a willingness to help, but also a willingness to grow and develop yourself as well. So taking feedback from your managers properly and applying that as well. Because you're there to work and make money, and I understand that, but you're also there to build skills to hopefully go into a field that you enjoy more, or as part-time or starting off, or maybe stay there and stay with the company. But you shouldn't have an attitude of going in and just working for the money and doing the job for the money. You should be taking in skills and expanding your development. So that's a big thing for me. And then the other thing we talked about was already respect. And I just mean that in a sense by treat customers, coworkers alike with respect, regardless of their background or their beliefs. Everyone wants to have fun at work. And that's one of the biggest things for me. We actually have a value that says have fun while being the best. And I'm a big person that likes to have fun at work. So big respect for everyone around.
Thank you. And last but not least, Chris, what are your non-negotiable expectations?
Yeah, I think what all the other panelists have mentioned is very true. So I'm just going to expand a little bit. So yes, I expect professionalism, a willingness and readiness to work. Like everyone else touched on, if you're going to be late, it's your responsibility to call. I have had a previous employee got his mom to call. Your mom doesn't work for me, you do. So I expect you to take this job seriously. preparedness to learn and preparedness to work, as in being there on time. If there's a uniform or dress code, you're ready to go when your shift starts. Like I said before, do every job well. Even if this job is not what you want to be doing for the rest of your life, you do want to take it seriously, respectfully and professionally, because it could be a good stepping stone, and you don't want to burn any bridges no matter what.
Awesome. And so I do have a follow-up question for the group of you that wasn't on the list, and it's about like self-evaluation and self-reflection. How important is it for you to evaluate your own skills, your own capabilities at the job, and recognize what you're doing well and what needs to be improved?
Okay. Well, I find it's okay just to ask. I've had some employees, that's some of my best employees, who've even just said, "Hey, how am I doing? Is this working well, or how can I improve these skills?" Because I am there to, as a manager, there to help you grow and to do your best so that we as a team can do our best. So it's okay to have an open communication. And hopefully, no, I'm not intimidating. I don't think I am generally. But it is okay to ask questions and to see how you're doing.
Awesome. What about for you, Emma?
I think it is a big thing. You should be constantly evaluating how you are at work. And like it was already mentioned, to ask your manager or your leader, they should also be providing that feedback for you, though. And if they're not, then you should probably go up to them and ask them, like we've already mentioned, because again, a giant goal of coming into work is to gain those skills and those experiences. There's so many different places that you can learn so much from, so many different people. And you can take the good and obviously leave the bad, or I suppose if you want to take the bad, but that's not recommended. Now, we have reviews in place where we would go over, when I was a sales manager, we would go over, I would actually have one-on-ones with every single associate. That was probably about 75 people. I would do that once a week for 75 people. And then I would just go over how they're doing for that week, what their goals are for that week, what they'd like to learn. And so if your manager's already not following up with you in regards to that, it's a huge thing for me. I would recommend asking 100%.
Awesome. What about for you, Phil?
I definitely agree with what Chris and Emma have said. I would say that if you're in a position where you are not questioning how you're doing, or you're not kind of evaluating your own role in wherever you're working, then maybe it's not the right place for you to work. Maybe it's not challenging to you, or maybe it's just simply boring, and maybe you need to find something that makes you happy. Like for Emma's example, where she has 75 people that she makes every week, if you're the kind of person who questions how you're doing, and you're going to find her instead of her trying to chase down you out of 75 people, that stands out apart from the crowd for Emma, because she sees that you're taking the initiative and you're taking the step to come find her and find out how you're doing. So to her, it probably shows that you're engaged and you're trying to make yourself better. That's what I'd say.
Awesome. And Shannon?
Honestly, I think I'm just going to be repeating a lot of what people said before, but there's literally nothing better than an employee who, if they don't feel that they have anything to do at that moment, will come and get you and be like, "Hey, I have some downtime. What should I be doing?" Or even an employee who comes to you and says like, "Hey, I noticed that you were, I don't know, doing this visual and I'm really interested in it. Do you think you'd be able to teach me some stuff?" That initiative to help out, to grow, shows that, you want to be there and you're actually kind of, seeking that feedback in general. And stuff like that makes you stand out so much. It's really like the most valuable thing you can do, in my opinion.
Awesome. We're super close to finishing up for the hour. Before we get into the last question, if any of you have any questions, please feel free to put into the chat, or you can just interject and we'll be able to hear you and then we can listen to you. Let's give our panelists a kind of 10-second think moment, because I want to know after this conversation for this hour, anything else that you feel should be communicated, what do you hope the students are taking away from our learning today? what would you want them to understand, reflect on, and remember as they get their first part-time job or as they get their 10th part-time job in 15 years? Like, what is that takeaway that you would want from them? So let's give you, about 10 seconds, nice long 10 seconds to think that through. And then we will start, we'll start how we started, or we'll end how we started. And we will go alphabetically, beginning with Miss Chris.
I found it. Okay. I think the best thing is no matter where you start with a job or what kind of job you start with, be it, fast food, retail, the service industry, you just really want to strive to do your best and learn as much as you can. And to every job that you're doing, no matter how trivial it may seem to you, is just to do your best and learn from it as much as you possibly can, because you never know where you're going to go with that.
Yeah, I mean, when you started at Le Chateau 10 years ago, part-time in the stock room at the Bayshore location, did you expect that you would be there 10 years later?
No, I didn't. I didn't think I'd be in charge of visual for all of Ottawa too for 2 years, or managing my own store. But you never know where something's going to take you, for sure. So do every job to the best of your abilities, and try to learn as much as you can from it, for sure.
Awesome. Emma, what are your final thoughts?
Well, I was going to say what Chris said already, but if I took 10 more seconds to think, which I obviously didn't, I want to say, just to expand on that, is that if you find yourself going into work and not liking going into work, it's because you're doing something wrong there, or you just don't like the place and it's time to find another place. It is hard to find a first-time job. I remember when I was looking for a first-time job, and it is a stressful thing, especially with no experience, but you guys just need to keep your head held high and keep trying, because you guys will get there. You guys will get a job, whether you're targeting big box chains like Best Buys, or private independently owned businesses like my bakery that I first started out at. You keep trying and don't give up, and keep having a positive attitude, because once you get in there, that positive attitude is going to take you a long way.
And Emma, as well, you are one of a type of person that you started at part-time at Future Shop when Future Shop was still around, and now you are operations manager at the largest volume in the city. So you might not expect that you're going to stay somewhere long term, or that you'll even move from part-time into full-time, let alone management, but you could eventually grow with that and have a lucrative career. Retail, like Shannon can attest to this, the manager of the Victoria's Secret and Rideau Center pulls in 6 figures a year. Like, you can make good money.
You sure?
Phil, sorry, go ahead, Shannon.
I was like, you sure can make good money. Don't think that people who work in retail, I know there's a misconception, or even service industries, where people don't think that they can do very well or make a living at it, but it's totally possible.
So let's go to Phil before we turn back to Shannon for her final thoughts, because we're going in alphabetical order, and I like my rules and following through on them. So Phil, what are your final thoughts and what you hope the students are taking away from today?
Again, I agree with what Chris and Emma have said. I'd say definitely be yourself when you go into whatever job that you find. It's super important that you stay true to yourself and true to who you are, because if you start trying to be someone that you're not, people are going to see through that right away. And usually your personality is what sets you apart from everyone else and what will carry you forward in your career.
Awesome. Thank you, Phil. And we know that's the case. We know that's the case with our schoolwork. We know that's the case with just hanging around at school and being with each other. Many of you will do presentations, and some of you will get up there and do it, by the book. This is what I'm going to say, and you get all your information out. And others of you, Sergey, kind of looking at you on this one, will go up and they're full of their own personality, but it doesn't change the information. It just makes it a Sergey presentation, as opposed to possibly like an Amir presentation or an Adela presentation. You still want to infuse yourself into whatever you're doing. And Shannon, what are your takeaways for the students today?
Honestly, mine would just be, don't be afraid of starting at the bottom. Like we've kind of talked about it, how, you know, Emma and Chris have like worked their way up from like part-time positions. And even earlier when it's like, you know, you want to gain experience, I suggested like working at Tim Hortons or something. Sometimes it doesn't necessarily seem glamorous, but at the same time, you're building such valuable skills that people are looking for. So you might not think that that's where you want to start, or sometimes you might not feel like that is good enough or anything, but it will really lead you to places that you want to go.
Awesome, thank you. And on that note too, if you are looking for your first part-time job, like McDonald's and Tim Hortons, they will oftentimes and regularly hire people part-time who have zero experience. That is oftentimes their employee base for the evenings and weekend shifts, and they will give the training that's necessary. Shoppers Drug Mart as well. Phil, that's where he started working part-time. There are jobs out there, and as the panelists have said, you know, be open, be honest about what you have to bring to the table. And if you don't think you have anything to bring to the table, you need to do some self-reflection, because everybody does. You just need to find what that actually is. Thank you to our panelists again. Thank you for taking up an hour of your holiday. For many people who are in the service industry, the holidays are sacred because they are one of the few guaranteed days off. One of the downsides of working in the service industry is that you work all the time. Shannon understands that better than anyone currently right now. Working, I think, 6 days this week at over 60 some hours.
That's right.
Yeah. So thank you to the four of you. Greatly appreciate it. Hopefully this conversation was useful and that you've learned more about part-time jobs, expectations, and how you can better yourself in terms of going forward. If you have any questions, you can forward them to me. And if they're specific to panelists, I can definitely reach out for you. Otherwise, I hope you have a lovely Monday and the rest of your week. And I will see you all sooner rather than later, hopefully.